Yeah.
I have lots of friends in the committee.
Yeah.
Folks, if you could take your seats, please. We're going to start right away with the Gairdner Awardee lecture.
I'm going to do the same. I've got your contact. Yeah.
Thank you, folks, for taking your seats, because we have 45 minutes for this session. Thank you.
Those videos for teaching purposes. So we'll be in touch. Yeah.
Okay. No, I don't think so. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, it's our distinct pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Janet Rosen, who's the CEO of the Gairdner Foundation. CUGH and the Gairdner Foundation developed a relationship a couple of years ago where we're very privileged to have the Gairdner Awardee, Global Health Awardee, give a special lecture, a plenary lecture here at our annual conference. And without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Janet Rosen.
Thank you, Keith. Good morning. I'm Janet Rosen. I'm the President and Scientific Director of the Gairdner Foundation. And we're delighted to be here at CUGH. And I'd really like to congratulate Keith and the whole team for developing such an amazing meeting. And really, it's a wonderful opportunity to bring together people interested in global health and, as we heard in the last session, the broader impact of planetary health from all over the world to really put their heads together on how we're going to make a difference going forward. The Gairdner Foundation has been honored to partner with CUGH and bring our Global Health Awardee here each year. So, Gairdner Foundation really is a foundation set up in Canada, best known for its prestigious prizes that we award to deserving scientists around the world. It's an icon in Canada and in the international scientific community. Our mission is to celebrate excellence, convene leaders, and inspire the next generation. And our reach expands far beyond the Canada Gairdner Awards to really raise the profile of the importance of science in Canada and around the world through educational outreach. Each year, we receive nominations from all corners of the world for our different types of awards. We have the Canada Gairdner International Awards, 5 of those recognizing biomedical research of high impact. Our Canada Gairdner Whiteman Award, which is specifically for a Canadian who's made a medical discovery and showcased leadership. And the award we're celebrating here today is our Global Health Award. The John Dirks Canada Gairdner Global Health Award has been around only since 2009. And this was really the brainchild of the previous director of the Gairdner Foundation, Dr. John Dirks, now our President Emeritus. He was really critical in developing this award, recognizing that this was an area where we don't have enough recognition for the enormous impact of global health research. And he brought it through to its today's, in where it stands today. He brought funding forward and really was absolutely critical in seeing it through. So the Global Health Award is really given annually for a seminal discovery in global health that's had an impact in the developing world. And we have some amazing past global health laureates. You see them here on the slide, and I can see at least one of them here in the audience, Dr. King Holmes, and there may be more. But really, this is an amazing group of people, many of them, I'm sure, all familiar to you here in the audience. And we've covered all sorts of areas. We've covered HIV, we've covered malnutrition, we've covered ivermectin and river blindness. And you'll see also that these scientists have been recognized in many different domains. And I'll particularly mention, of course, that Dr. Amura, who received the Gairdner for his work on ivermectin, went on to receive the Nobel Prize shortly thereafter. So he's the 84th Gairdner laureate across all our awards who's gone on from receiving a Gairdner Award to receiving a Nobel Prize. So it's a very exciting call when I get on the phone with people. The prestige of the Gairdner Awards really depends on in no large part on the rigor and excellence of our adjudication process, where we really bring together outstanding researchers in their own right to really survey the nominations that we receive and make sure that we produce a list that is fantastic and represents the very best of research and impact. And here is our Global Health Committee members, 13 members, some again who are here in the audience today. Again, names that I'm sure many of you recognize. This is a fantastic group. We meet in person in Toronto to review the awards. We did that in January for these awards, in February rather, and that was my first time through. I've only joined the Gairdner Foundation last May, so meeting with this committee and discussing impact of global health was a real pleasure to me. And through that award process, we were very happy, of course, to come out at the end of the process with a unanimous recommendation for Dr. Cesar Vitora. Our nominations, we receive them all year. Well, I would really encourage all of you, if you know somebody you think should be nominated for this prestigious award, a global health leader who's made real impact on health in the developing world from all over the world, please think about this. Send us your nominations. The nomination guidelines are on our website, www.gairdner.org. It's pretty simple. We have a new website. It's very spiffy. And the deadline for nominations is October 1. So please think about it. We're really open. We're particularly looking for a broad diversity of nominations for this award. It can be an individual. It can be more than one individual, small teams, people who've made an impact. Now, I'd like to just turn and introduce today's our 2017 Canada Gairdner Global Health Award laureate, Dr. Cesar Vitora. He's Emeritus Professor at the Federal University of Pelotas in Brazil, and he's being recognized for his work in maternal and child health and nutrition in low and middle income countries. And throughout his career, Dr. Vitora has really had three main areas of interest and concentration: child health and nutrition, health programming monitoring, evaluation and health equity. And he's used the tools of epidemiology to really look at in depth and provide evidence to support public health interventions. Early in his career, Dr. Vitora set up one of the longest running birth cohort studies in the world, the 1982 Pelotas birth cohort, with more than 6,000 participants that are still being monitored today. And those of you who know how difficult it is to run birth cohorts, when I think about what happened in the States to try to develop birth cohorts, you'll recognize that this is an incredible undertaking and a really important tool that not only informs birth cohorts in Brazil, but informs us around the world. And it's from these studies and others that he really helped to establish the influence of the first 1,000 days of life on lifelong outcomes, and have led on to many other contributions in public health. In the 1980s, the work that he's really being recognized for here today, Dr. Vitora conducted the first study showing the importance of exclusive breastfeeding for the prevention of early infant mortality. And his findings have contributed to global policy recommendations by UNICEF, by WHO, for mothers to breastfeed their infants exclusively for the first 6 months of life. We now almost think of that as something we just know. Everybody knows that. But it came really from evidence produced by Dr. Vitora. More recently, his long-term birth cohorts have documented the benefits of breastfeeding beyond early infant mortality, but impact on adult intelligence, education, income, as well as the long-term consequences of early life undernutrition. So he continues to make incredibly important contributions to evaluating the impact of health interventions on child mortality and the study of social inequalities in child health. His advice and expertise is highly sought after worldwide, and we're really delighted that he's made a special trip to Washington to this meeting to present today. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Vittore to the stage to present his lecture entitled Think Locally, Act Globally, From South to the World. Dr. Vittore.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a real honor to receive the award and to be able to tell you a bit about my career and how my academic life worked out. I'm actually very honored to be the first Brazilian to get this award too, and actually the first scientist who spent his whole life working in the South. So that's going to be one of the themes of my talk too. Janet, I hadn't realized who was in the selection committee. And there are lots of friends there. That probably explains why I got the awards. I hadn't realized that. But anyway, here we go. Let me tell you a little bit about Pelotas, and given the importance of planetary health in this meeting, I decided to tell you how research in a relative remote place. I'm not sure you can see Pelotas there. But to make a long story short, I'm 4 hours away by road to the nearest airport. And from there, I have to catch an internal flight in Brazil and then the long-haul flight overseas. So every trip I take takes about 20 hours or more. So it's a pretty remote place, which is good for doing research, by the way, because we're fairly isolated and our community doesn't move around very much. But Pelotas was very rich in the 19th century with the beef industry, and there was the main center for making jerky or dried meat in Brazil. That was before refrigerators were invented, then Pelotas went bankrupt. So it's now a poor city in many aspects. It rains a lot, you can see from these pictures, and it has about 350,000 people, and we have been doing all these repeated studies in which we study the whole cohort of newborns in given years. And I'm going to address 4 topics in this talk. The first one is the early study on exclusive breastfeeding. Then I'm going to talk to you about the WHO growth curves and the 1,000 days, and then I'll talk to you about a little bit about some of my international work on the countdown to 2030. Just after I trained in London, I came back to Pelotas as a junior professor, and I was thinking about how to apply all these sophisticated methods like case control studies at that time, logistic regression, to the problems that I was seeing in the communities where I worked. Because these methods were mainly used at that stage for chronic disease, for cancer, and for NCDs. And I then designed a study, which was my first ever Lancet publication. That was before even Richard was the editor in the Lancet, in which we did a case control study. We looked at kids who died, and we looked at 2 neighborhood controls for each child. And we were able to document this incredible odds ratio of 14.2. I would still remember when I first looked at that, we had a small computer. And I thought, I must have got the comma wrong. It must be 1.42, not 14.2. And when we compared babies who were receiving just formula or cow's milk, they were 14 times more likely to die from diarrhea than those who received breast milk. And those who were mixed fed were in the middle. But that was fine. I think it was the first modern study that was specifically designed to look at breastfeeding. I mean, the whole study was designed to do that, taking into account reverse causation and confounding, and so on. But the new thing about this study came here in this other paper, which we just published a little bit later. That little baby bottle is called chuquinha in Brazil, and it's used for giving water and teas to newborns. My kids got it. everyone in Brazil at that stage was, every infant was receiving additional liquids because it was believed that breast milk was not enough. They needed to get something else because they would be thirsty and so on. And in a way, studying the effect of fluids was like studying breast cancer, or studying lung cancer in a population where everybody smoked. I mean, everybody was receiving them. So the idea that I had to say, let's look at how many bottles a day they get, and let's put that in our logistic regression model as a continuous variable. And that's when we found that each daily bottle was associated with a 42% increase in diarrhea mortality. That study came out, and soon thereafter, there was a study by Ken Brown and Bob Black and their group in Peru looking at morbidity. There was a study in the Philippines by Barry Popkin and colleagues at the Cebu cohort. And also there were studies coming out on the water requirements. It was shown that breastfed infants did not need extra water. Breast milk was a sufficient source of the fluids they needed. And there was also studies on the contamination of feeding bottles, such as the Choquinhas that I just showed you. And it was great that when the early 90s, that WHO and UNICEF came out and recognized this body of research and therefore started to promote exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life. So it's really rewarding to have that. And nowadays, virtually every pediatric society in the world adopts this recommendation. Now, one problem that we had at that stage is that breastfed kids were perceived to be faltering. Many healthy breastfed babies were diagnosed with growth faltering and were therefore weaned, and the formula was introduced. And this graph here that you show on the left, that's with my breastfeeding study, then they started inviting me to committees and things like that. So I was part of the WHO expert committee on physical status, the use and interpretation of anthropometry, which was led by Jean-Pierre Habich. And one of the analyses we did, we took the existing growth curves, which were the NCHS growth curves at that stage. We flattened them, so the 0 line is the median. And we took infants, were healthy breastfed infants who were perfectly healthy, but they seemed to be faltering. So we said there must be something wrong with the curves. And actually the NCHS curves were based on a single cohort study from Fells, Ohio, and they were all white. They were predominantly bottle fed. About 80% of them were exclusive bottle fed. So we thought there must be something wrong with the curve. And then with Mercedes Iones from WHO and Bert Garza and other colleagues, we designed a multi-center study to create new growth curves. Obviously, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but we selected healthy, upper socioeconomic status families, non-smoking mothers, singletons, and willingness to comply with the breastfeeding recommendation. That's how we selected these cohorts. We did that in 6 parts of the world. And surprisingly, a bit surprising, the growth of these kids with these selection criteria was very, very similar in all these different places. So if we select the high socioeconomic status, healthy family, good health care, good environment, the kids grow well, at least until the age of 5 years. That's when we stopped the study. In fact, believe it or not, the kids from Pelotas are just a little bit taller than the Norwegians, which, looking at me, you'd never imagine. So we came out. I actually wrote the protocol for this study, and then the people from the different groups came to Pelotas to be trained on the methods. And here's the first child who completed the study in 1999, Luisa. And the curves were disseminated by WHO, and nowadays 140 countries in the world adopt these curves. So this is really rewarding. I mean, it's much better than publishing a paper in a good journal, is to actually see that your work is in growth charts all over the world. Now, the third piece of work I want to talk to you about, and Janet has made some reference to that, is the importance of nutrition in the first 1,000 days. And here are the Pelotas cohorts. Every 11 years, we start a new birth cohort. We take all births in the city, about 5,000 births in each cohort. We are probably one of the most studied cities in the world, and we have a joke. We say that the typical family in Pelotas includes the parents, 2 kids, and an interviewer from our research group, because we're all over the place. You can imagine, we have about 20,000 people in the cohorts. The percentages here are follow-up rates, which we're very proud of. 30 years, we have 68% of the 1982 cohort, and as you go down, the percentages get higher because, of course, they are younger. So it's really great, and everybody's the people who are in the cohorts are very proud of it, because there's a lot of talk, there's a lot in the media, in the television, and so on. So each cohort take every social class, all births in a given year, and this is how we started. We had paper questionnaires. We had a single room. One of my field workers is sitting here, Cynthia Lombardi. She now works for PAHO here in Washington. But we had a single computer. We had to take turns. That was the first computer in Pelotas ever. And you can see, I actually interviewed and measured kids. So we didn't have that much money, so we couldn't just sit behind the computer. And Pelotas was very poor at that stage, but if you can see from these pictures, the one on the left, a very poor family, African, Brazilians, middle-class family, and then an upper-class family. We have a lot of Germans in Pelotas too, so you see the blonde hair that migrated to Brazil in the 1800s. So it's a unique opportunity to study inequalities, and I'm coming back to that later. Now we have a full research center just for the cohorts, built with Brazilian money and equipment with funds from international agencies, including the Wellcome Trust mainly. And we are studying no longer diarrhea and malnutrition. We're now really concerned about overweight. Over half of our 1982 cohort is overweight. So we have bot pods, we have 3D photonic scanners, we have DEXA, we have all sorts of methods for studying obesity, visceral fats, subcutaneous fat. We have the largest series of abdominal ultrasound in a cohort. About 4,000 people have abdominal ultrasound, so we're keeping up and seeing what happens to them over time. I became very interested in the first 2 years of life when we analyzed, at that stage, 54 DHS surveys. Again, we flattened the curve, the growth curve, so 0 means you're on the median, and we showed that most of the faltering actually takes place in the first 2 years of life. And it starts preconceptionally. These are typical kids. These are not kids in the growth curve. They're unselected populations. The only thing I regret is that it never occurred to me to add 270 to 365 to 365 and get 1,000. And I'm told that this idea was originated here in DC by some public relation people working for Hillary Clinton when she launched the 1,000 Days initiative here as well. 1,000 Days is not only about physical growth, it's also about development, brain development, psychomotor development. But it's a brilliant idea. At that stage, the Lancet invited me to review the long-term consequences of undernutrition, and we set up the cohorts consortium, which were 5 cohorts, the 5 longest running cohorts in low and middle income countries, because we wanted to go beyond Pelotas, wanted to see if our results were also duplicated in other parts of the world. It was a great group of people working together. We published lots of papers, and I'm going to summarize the findings in 2 slides. My colleagues from the cohort say this is a Caesar's cartoons, because they're cartoons, they're not slides. Okay, they are based on real data, but they're summarizing all our studies on obesity, on blood pressure, on diabetes, and also our studies on human capital, on mental development, IQ, and so on. And basically what we find here is this is weight, conditional weight. It's adjusted for previous weights, a bit sophisticated, but basically it may be interpreted as weight gain according to age. And for human capital, IQ and schooling and so on, and for child survival, it's really good to put on weight early. Up to 2 years of age, it makes a lot of difference. Because you're not only putting on weight, I'm coming back to that. Now, if you flip it, if you look at the risk of NCDs, putting on weight early is not too bad. It really doesn't have, with a couple of exceptions, and this is in cohorts from low and middle income countries, okay? These are cohorts that had low birth weight, and they had stunting and so on. It's really not too bad, but if you put on weight after 2 years, then it becomes really bad. So when you flip both charts, you see there's the two lines intersect around 2 years of life, and therefore there's a real challenge there what to do. And then again, going back to the Lancet Global Health, and I see Zoe is here in the audience, we published this paper. Actually, this was in the Lancet. The next one is Lancet Global Health, in which we disentangle linear growth from weight gain using statistical methods, the conditional regression method. And we found that if you put on rapid weight gain after 2 to 4 years of life, later than that, your risk of NCD really increases. If you just look at linear growth and take away the excess weight gain, it doesn't do any harm. It's really beneficial in the first 2 years of life, and it's not really associated with the bad outcomes. With one exception, which is blood pressure, but that's because tall buildings need stronger pumps to get the water up to the top floors. So there is a little effect on blood pressure, but everything else, there is no harmful effect of linear growth. So the real challenge here, and this is a great public health challenge, is how can we promote weight gain and growth in the first 2 years, but not have excessive weight gain after 2 years. It's complicated public health messages because it seems contradictory, but we really have to work on both sides because we still have these populations that are still dying from undernutrition and stunting in the short term, but we don't want them to be overweight adults because we have been promoting rapid gain. So that's a real question. I'll leave that to the audience to figure out how to do that. I'm not sure I know. This is a cohort group from the 5 countries. It's really been a wonderful partnership. Just one slide here, and that's from the Lancet Global Health. Because we have a 30-year cohort, we were able to look at IQ and breastfeeding. And unlike the West, unlike the North, breastfeeding in Brazil is not more common among the rich. It's equally common. It's slightly more common among the poor, actually. So we don't get all these biases that affect so many of the studies that are done in the North. And if you look at these 3 charts here, we looked at IQ goes up by about 4 points. This is breastfeeding duration in months, less than 1 to 12 or more. Schooling goes up, and income goes up, then goes down a little bit, but that's a smaller group, and if you fit a straight line here, it still has a significant linear trend. But the point here is, who are these people? They are more intelligent, they have higher schooling, they don't make much money. I think they're academics. That's my only interpretation. I was breastfed for quite a long time, by the way. This paper got a lot of media coverage because it touched on 2 tricky issues, which is breastfeeding is very controversial, and income. So there was a lot of good reaction, but there was also some bad reaction because there was the idea that maybe we were blaming women for not breastfeeding. And then we came up with the Lancet series on breastfeeding about a year ago, in which our cover says success in breastfeeding is not the sole responsibility of a woman. It is a promotion of breastfeeding is a societal imperative. So it's really, a society must promote breastfeeding, not put the responsibility on individual women. And those of you who live in the US know how hard this can be. Now, a couple quick slides now. Brazil is a success story for breastfeeding. Now, I'm not taking credit for this, by the way. because there's a huge movement. And the average, the median duration of any breastfeeding, this is not exclusive, it went up from 2.5 when breastfeeding was considered to be something that poor people did. It was not modern. Breastfeeding was seen as antiquated. And it went up to 14 months now. So I think it's the largest increase in any country that I know of. And it was due to multiple investments that you see on the right there that included the whole Brazilian society in this effort. My last point here is the countdown. And I'm going to tell you a bit more about what we are doing at global level. Many of you will have heard about the countdown to 2015. And now it's been renamed as Countdown to 2030. It started with the Lancet Child Survival Series. We had a meeting in Bellagio in 2003. We were really worried that the money for global health was going away from maternal and child health. And there was a lot of investment on HIV. NCDs were becoming more common, malaria, tuberculosis. And we said we need to convene some meetings to put pressure on countries and on international agencies and funders to invest more in child health. At that stage, we had 10.7 million child deaths a year. We're now below 6 million, which is a great success. And then we have a report every 2 years, and it's a multi-stakeholder initiative. You know, it includes the UN, it includes the Lancet, and many universities, funders, bilaterals. 42 different logos in our report. And the core of the countdown work is this 2-page profile in which we summarize data on very many different indicators for each country. People at country level really like that. We make a lot of effort to make it user-friendly and reader-friendly. And I led this paper on inequalities in health, in which we said it's not enough to measure global averages. We really have to go beyond that and look at within-country inequalities. And if in the countdown we designed this graph, it took several iterations with policymakers to come up with a simple graph. And we think we did a good job. We call this an equiplot. This is coverage. This is Nigeria. The coverage in the highest 20% of the population, richest 20%, and coverage in the poorest 20%. Let's say skilled birth attendance about 10% here and almost 90% there. So it's a very simple way of displaying inequalities. And I think as I get older too, I'm more interested in policy and in dissemination and making sure that my complex logistic regression models become cartoons like this one or like the one I showed you before. Why inequalities? Well, I grew up in the most unequal country in the world. It's no longer the most unequal country. Brazil is doing better now. Our Gini coefficient fell by about 1 point a year for several years. But all Brazilian epidemiologists are social epidemiologists. And when I came back to Brazil, all five of us were social epidemiologists. We started with a small community, and this book was based on the 1982 birth cohort. It's called Epidemiologia da Desigualdade, which doesn't need translation. And also the point that I'm trying to make is that it's not only ethical and moral reasons that make equity important, it's really practical reasons. We can design better programs if we can understand who is not being reached. Now, Brazil is getting a lot of bad press recently with a number of things, government changes and corruption. But we did achieve a lot. Look at these equiplots for stunting. In 75, there was 60% stunting in the poorest 20%, and about 10% stunting in the richest 20%. And look at that. That's what we had in our last national survey. So it is possible by having a number of intersectoral pro-poor measures to actually achieve massive reductions in stunting. Now, I'm coming to the end, and the SDGs give us a much more difficult task than the MDGs did. To start with, there are 17 of them rather than 8, and of the 8, 3 were related to health, and now we only have 1 to health. And the last SDG is SDG 17 and has a number of goals, sub-goals, and one of them is to disaggregate data according to income, race, ethnicity, so on. So it's very important. We have a huge task ahead of us in ensuring that studies of inequalities, monitoring of inequalities can continue. Richard Horton was speaking here, you know, how it's really one of the driving forces of epidemiology these days, should be documenting, studying, monitoring, and promoting solutions to improve equity, which many countries have done. It's not impossible. It can be done. Now, this is my team. So this is the team of number crunchers now that analyze our surveys. And I just wanted to conclude, when I look at their faces, I'm wondering how many of them are still in Brazil and how many will go north. And I really think we need to do something about the brain drain. Last year I lost 4 students. I mean, I didn't lose them. They went to university in the north. They were well trained, by the way. I think so I can take some credit for that. But Brazil spends a lot of money. We have a free university system in Brazil. They don't pay fees or tuition for undergraduate, master's, or doctorate, and in their doctorate, we pay for them to spend a year abroad. The Brazilian government pays for them. Travel, fees, everything. Now, that helps universities in the north recruit them. And I was wondering, I just wanted to challenge this group. Can we do something about it? You know, it's very hard. We don't want to put the decision on individual basis. I see lots of faces from the south here who must be working in university in the north. But our soccer players earned our country millions and millions when they are sold to Barcelona or to Manchester United. Can we have some system that governments would interact and promote some kind of retribution to the South for having trained these people? Second, what about global health departments? Why? Thank you. Why can't every person from the South who's recruited to one of the global health departments in the North have a part of the contract that says that they will spend 3 months a year back in their own country teaching and doing research. And the university in the North will cover their salary for that. So that's it. Number 3, what about funding agencies? You know, sometimes, forgive me for saying this, sometimes I feel that a lot of the funding global health is money that is laundered through a university in the North for global health. You don't take it negative, but I think the bulk of the grants come to universities in the North, even though we are studying a problem in the South with part of the field work of data collection in the South. So can we do something about the brain drain? And this is my challenge with which I want to finish. Planetary health, Richard, well done. No, great journal. You know, I'm sure you'll be rejecting my papers soon, but I'll make sure I submit them. My equity work, we have data from over 100 countries and for about 350 surveys. And when we look at things like governance, for example, and I'm sure if we look at climate change, we'll see the same, governance is really strongly associated with outcomes in the poorest 20%. The rich 20%, there's very little association. They have a safety net. And climate change and environmental change will definitely affect the poor more than the rich. So we now have the tools by studying equity of showing exactly who is being affected by each of these phenomena. Now, you all know the motto, think globally, act locally. I try to flip it. So think locally. You know, let's think about my problems in Pelotas and act globally. And by doing that, I put Pelotas at the top of the world. Thank you.
Unbelievable, Dr. Ventura. Lessons for all of us. Thank you so much, really. To do the official thank you, we're very privileged to have a giant in global health, friend to all, well known to all, CUGH board member, Dr. King Holmes.
Well, thank you, Keith. Keith just invited me to do this, so this isn't well prepared, but I just think congratulations to you, Cesar, for what is a beautiful and obviously important series of studies with potentially huge impact. So it's really impressive. And congratulations to Janet and to the Gairdner Foundation for a great selection this year, not only because of the importance of his work, but because of his sense of humor and skills in presenting his work. So I think I had one question I wanted to ask you, just to start the questions, about exclusive breastfeeding. And it was, I think, in the mid-'80s, early '80s maybe, that there were studies that suggested, and I think have shown, that exclusive breastfeeding is associated with not only the benefits you've talked about here, but with reducing the risk of mother-to-child transmission of HIV infection. So I'm wondering if you can comment on that and open this up to questions from others. So again, congratulations. Great presentation.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on HIV because fortunately we don't have much HIV where I live, but the studies that I know is that when artificial milk or formula or animal milk is introduced in the baby diet, the risk of transmission of HIV through breast milk is increased because of microhemorrhages and because they're easy for the virus to penetrate. So there are recommendations now that if a mother is HIV positive and breastfeeds, it should be breastfed exclusively and not add any other type of milk, because that would therefore increase the risk of transmission. Yeah, these are the international recommendations.
Great. Well, there is no more time. I'm informed by Keith for questions, but I got to sneak one in anyway. So again, thank you so much for your work.